So thank you everyone for joining us tonight. And thank you for the new people for joining us from across the country. It's so great to have representation from across Canada here on our calls. So we created the Coach Socialization series by Canadian Sports Centre Atlantic to kind of provide a platform for coaches to connect with each other, but also learn from a variety of professionals on a variety of topics. So last week we had a mental health talk. We've had strength and conditioning coaches come on. We've had coaches from a variety level come on and talk about what they're doing during this time and some of their best practices. And we've also had a variety of dietitians come on. So tonight we have Melissa with us, who is a dietitian with Canadian Sports Centre Atlantic. And she's come on before for a couple sessions, and we have a few more with her in them as well. And all of those previous sessions can be found online on our YouTube channel, so definitely check those out. But tonight, the nutrition topic that she's going to be talking to us about is about how, if there is a best diet and if there is a best way to eat, and kind of discussing that controversial topic, really. So for the duration of the presentation, we will ask that you keep your microphone muted, and then we will unmute you during the times when it's an open discussion, and then at the end we'll have a Q&A, so you can definitely unmute yourself then. But during the presentation, just stick to the chat box, and Melissa will be able to see that if you have any questions. So Melissa, we'll get you to take it away from here.
Perfect. All right. Hello, everyone. Nice to see everyone tonight, and thank you for the introduction, Kirsty. So I'm going to just share my screen because I love myself some PowerPoint. So there we go. All right, everyone, just throw a thumbs up if you can see my screen, the right one with my presentation. Awesome, perfect, thank you. So tonight I thought we would talk about something that is pretty prevalent. It doesn't matter if, just like Kirsty said, it's very controversial, and I'm sure I'm sure most of us have tried a different diet or changed the way that we eat somewhere along the way, or we have friends who are always trying the newest way to eat or adjusting their diet. And so I'm sure there's always lots of questions. And if you go online, there's 5 million different people telling you that this is the way that you have to eat. Everyone's and I'm sure you also have friends who have done totally different ways of eating and had really good results, even though it's one person is doing this way of eating and the other person is doing that way, and they both have good results. So with that whole idea, we're going to kind of dig into the question of, is there a best diet, or is there a best way to eat? So the first place, obviously, to start is we're just going to talk about some of the main diets or ways to eat that are out there. Obviously there are 5 million different ones that are out there. This is just 5 of them. But so there's of course the plant-based, which has made a massive comeback, or really came onto the scene again with that last Netflix documentary, The Game Changer. That definitely made a lot of people think about plant-based eating. And then there's paleo, that's kind of been around for a long time, thinking about eating our ancestors a bit more. And then there's keto, which has also been a really big one the last, I think it's been I don't know how many years now. It's been a couple of years for sure. So keto's been really big. And then we see Mediterranean a lot. That one gets a lot of hype from health professionals. That one is around. And then there's the old school low fat. I think that had its heyday probably, I think that was 15 to 20 years ago. I don't know. I even I lose track. But that was a big one for quite a while. But something that I really want to bring up, and something that I think is really interesting, is the fact that you can know 5 different people who are doing a plant-based diet, and they can be very different, because you can be doing plant-based and you can be a vegetarian, you can be doing plant-based and you can be doing a lacto-ovo vegetarian kind of thing, where you still eat dairy and eggs. You can be doing vegan, you can be doing raw vegan. So there's lots of variation in each one of these different diets. They can be so different. For another example, keto, you can be doing a very, very low carb keto. You can be doing a standard. There's your high protein carb diet. Then there's the really strict keto, which is more epileptic kind of stuff. So if you're someone who has epilepsy, they can use keto, but it's super strict. That's another one. Or there's keto cycling. But that's all just to say really that there are so many different variations in these diets. There's like tons of different ways. Just because one person's doing plant-based doesn't mean it's the same as the other person, or keto, or any of that kind of stuff. So those are some of the main ones with all their different variations. But let's start looking into like some of the science and some of the research that's out there just around like their differences, and if anyone has looked into if there is one that's better than the other. And so this is one of like the big papers that I found. It was obviously, it's called like, can we say what diet is best for health? Obviously, I should just read this and this can answer my question. If only. So this particular like paper, it looked at like low carb, kind of our like low fat vegetarian, low glycemic, Mediterranean, like our mixed kind of stuff, and then our paleo. And as you can see, like each one of those like different styles of eating or diet has some like health benefits that are related to it. But what we want to focus on a lot tonight are some of those compatible elements. So things that they found kind of like ran through each one of those different diets. So mostly they like talked about limiting refined starches. They talked about limiting like added sugars, processed foods, like limiting some of the intake of like certain fats, emphasis on like whole plant foods, and then protein, obviously, whether or not that's with like meats included. But one other like thing that I really want to mention, and that we're going to come back to a bit later on, is this concept of something that is potentially like consistent with all of these different diets, is that it comes back to like food, not too much food, and mostly plants. Pretty cool. Very simple, like 5 simple words. So that's a big paper that talks about specific ones and if there's some different health benefits. But as you can see, each one has some like particular benefits, but there is like a vein of like specific things that each one of them has that can work towards having a healthy lifestyle. And we'll definitely come back to that. But first, I thought we should touch on the main reason why most people go on a diet or change their way of eating. Obviously, there's things like sometimes we can change the way we eat because we have, for religious reasons or for some ethical reasons or environmental, there's some of those reasons why people will change the way they eat or when they pick a specific diet. But when we really get down to it, a lot of the time when we change the way that we eat or go on a specific diet, it comes back to like trying to change our body composition. Unfortunately, right? That tends to be what we usually go on a diet, or why we change our eating pattern, is wanting to either like decrease our weight or maybe even like bulk up, get more muscle mass. So let's look at some of the research that's out there. This is a paper, it came out this year, so 2020. And what this paper looked at was a bunch of like the different diets or eating patterns that are out there. And these ones in particular have to do with like your macronutrient distribution. So like how much protein, how much fat, and how much carb. And each one of these has like different kind of breakdowns for that. So I looked at 14 in total, and they were looking for like weight and blood pressure reduction. So those are kind of the defining things that they were using. And what they found was that almost all of these macronutrient diets, so it didn't really matter which macronutrient like ratios you were using, but over 6 months, most of them showed like a modest weight loss and some improved blood pressure. But once we got further out to like a year, so like 12 months afterwards, that weight reduction started to diminish and the blood pressure improvements were mostly gone. So really just showing that there wasn't much of a difference, and it didn't matter which one of these kind of diets or patterns or eating they were doing. So it didn't matter what your macronutrient distribution was, they all kind of had the same results. And then another big paper that just came out this year too, so 2020, this one is like called Scientific Evidence for Diets for Weight Loss, Different Macronutrient Composition, Intermittent Fasting, and Popular Diets. So this one as well looked at diets that like deal more with your macronutrient content. So the low fat or high fat, high protein, low carb, doesn't matter, but just playing around with those macronutrients, so amounts of protein to fat to carb. They found some like short-term beneficial stuff. They found that it can like jumpstart some weight loss for people, but long-term, this paper as well found that it didn't matter what ratio you're using, it still had similar weight loss if you were dealing with the same amount of like caloric reduction. So that's kind of like the diets that deal with the macronutrient stuff. And then when they looked at the ones that manipulate timing, so like your intermittent fasting style way of eating, they found some metabolic health benefits, definitely. Only thing is that they're still working on some more like human results, human studies. Some people, they can overeat. Some people, it like jump-started their weight loss that they're trying to do. But key thing is that didn't matter which one of the diets with like the manipulating of timing, all of them came back to similar weight loss as long as you stayed within that same caloric reduction. So as long as they're reducing their calories about the same amount, then they had about the same weight loss. And then last but not least, they also looked at the diets that have to do more with like restricting specific food groups or food. So like plant-based or Mediterranean or gluten-free or paleo. There was evidence of success for each one of those. But again, it came back to not long-term wise. A lot of them, it wasn't like dialed in that, yes, you'll for sure see long-term stuff. The Mediterranean would be the only one that they saw a bit where long-term there were some benefits. But the key thing that I really want to bring up though is what they found the factors were for success. And number one is one that I talk to people about all the time, especially like when I have any athletes that come in and they want to like change to a different style of eating. I always have to ask them, is this a way of eating that you think you're going to be able to do for the rest of your life? Because if you can't, if this isn't something that you can stick to, then what's the point? Like statistically speaking, like from research wise, if we go back or if we can't stick with it, in the end, we end up just going back to the same way of eating and having the same health results that we had before. And then if we're talking from the weight loss side, that negative energy balance is a really important thing. So making sure that we eat less than what we're burning. And then number 3 is a super big thing that we'll talk about even more tonight, is that really making sure that no matter what style of eating pattern you're doing, no matter what style of diet, is making sure that you also get that really high quality food. So like good quality in the food that you're eating. And just to like really push home something that we've talked about already. This is another paper. And as well, if you guys ever want any really good information, nutrition wise and exercise physiology stuff, My Sports Science, he puts out a lot of really good infographics and good information. But this is based off of some research that showed why do all these different diets work for weight loss? Like why can different friends lose weight even though they're on like totally different diet patterns or different ways of eating? And it comes always back to if they create a calorie deficit. So each one of those can kind of work and people can lose weight, and it's by creating a calorie deficit, not so much the other like short descriptions of like what they're eating and how they're eating and timing and all that kind of stuff. So now that I've kind of hounded you about the fact that there's all these different like ways of eating and different patterns of consuming food, even though they're different and they say different things, different macronutrients, different timing, different foods or food groups that are there aren't there, that there is always this like underlying current of specific things that are there that are similar within each one of these diets. And along that vein, it comes to like this thought of, or this idea that a healthy diet doesn't have to look the same for everyone. So if all these different diets, if they have this core vein in there, like that we'll get to for sure, your healthy diet doesn't have to look the same as the other person's if we make sure that they have these key things that most of these diets already have. But I know I'm saying this in a really awkward word. We'll dig into it a little bit. So, but before we get to there, I want to talk a little bit about like the fact, like, wouldn't it be a whole lot easier if I could just tell you as a dietitian, this would make my life so easy if I could just tell you that this is a diet that you need to eat and this is going to make you the healthiest person possible. Like, easiest job ever if I could just tell people that this is it, this is how you do it. But we're going to talk about all these different factors that really come into play that affect kind of like what pattern or eating pattern or diet works best for you or for your athletes that you're working with. So let's start with the first one. So first one I always like to bring up is your dietary preferences or exclusions. So just for a story to kind of bring this home, it was a couple months ago, I was working with an athlete, and he had just watched Game Changers, which we all did. He was inspired to become or eat more of like a vegan vegetarian lifestyle, which was awesome. So I was digging into his diet with him, walking through like the best way to like make sure that he was still changing what he was eating to fit that his new vegan or vegetarian lifestyle they wanted to follow, but making sure he still got all the different things that he needs to be as healthy as possible. And so we were talking about protein. And I was like, as I was digging through his diet and like mentioning all these like awesome sources of protein for someone who wants to be vegan or vegetarian, I soon realized that he like hated soy products, didn't like tofu, really didn't like beans of any sort, didn't know how to cook a bunch of this stuff. And so like it quickly became really obvious that this is going to be pretty hard for him to like follow that lifestyle, because most of the things that where you can get protein was either like something that he didn't like, didn't know how to cook. So it just was like, he tried it for a little while, but didn't last for very long. And that was because it was his preference. He just really didn't like tofu, and he didn't like beans, and he didn't like most of the things that had protein in it that he could use to kind of match his needs. So that was one example. So that's how it could definitely impact what eating pattern is good or the best for you. Is if you really hate something, then, and that's a key part of like one of these eating patterns, that's going to work out really hard for you. Or else, what's another thing? Like allergies is a big one. I know, like one of my old roommates, I think she was allergic to all animal proteins, all dairy, all soy. So there was a lot of stuff that she was allergic to. So a lot of these specific eating patterns would never work in her life because, you know, she was allergic to a lot of this stuff. So for her to go on a keto diet would have been super, super tricky because all meat proteins made her very, very sick. So that's how that whole what you like to eat, what you like to cut out really plays into it. So even if it's ethical reasons and you don't want to eat animal products, then that's going to help you like sort out what kind of diet or eating pattern works for you the best. So that's one of the factors. Another big one that I like to bring up is budget. It's not something that we think about all the time necessarily, but when we're speaking with our athletes, it's being aware of like what their income is. So how much your income is, what amount of dispendable cash flow you have, that can really impact what kind of diet works best for you. Just to give you a story, I was like, I'm sure you've all done this, but back in the time before when I was a nutrition student, I remember many times being in the grocery store and looking around, obviously, because this is what you do as a nutrition student. I'm sure lots of you have as well, as you look at what everyone else has in their carts and you kind of like are scoping out what they have in there. And I remember many times looking over and seeing like, you know, a young family, and they would have all these foods in their in their basket that in my very judgmental, narrow mind was like, oh my goodness, that's terrible. You can't be feeding your kids 5 boxes of Kraft dinner. That's just not proper. But the idea comes back to you, if you don't have a bunch of dispendable cash and you can feed your family a bunch with, or many times with like 5 boxes of Kraft dinner, why should I tell you that you need to go on a vegan or a keto or a vegan diet where you have to buy like all this super expensive, like you can buy 5 boxes of Kraft dinner, or you can buy 5 bags of spinach. Which one's going to feed your family better? So being aware of like that income, that can really impact people on like what kind of diet or eating pattern works for them, because we don't all have money to spend on the most expensive things. I remember when I did a short stint at the grocery store as a dietitian. This was back when keto was really big, or still is. It was really big, and almond flour is like a huge thing for keto. You do a lot of baking with almond flour. And I'd have many people come over and like see the little itty bitty bag of almond flour that was like $15 and then like walk away and be like, I can't afford that. That's not something that's going to be like an option in my life. So just that idea of like money can play huge in there. And then another big factor for kind of deciding like what eating pattern works good for you is like some of your habits. So do you prefer to eat like, you know, your organic-y stuff, or more your conventional? And along that same path is your access. So let's think I'm pretty sure we've got people from all across Canada, but rural Canada is rural Canada. It doesn't matter where you live. But so if you are in rural Nova Scotia, for anyone who's from here, like Maitland, and you have to go shop at Friesenroy, which is a tiny little itty bitty gas station, what you're going to be able to get there on a day-to-day basis for your groceries is not going to be the same as if you had access to a grocery store just down the block. So if I wanted to start eating a very particular way of eating, like I wanted to turn and just eat like a vegan life, it's going to be really hard to like buy the groceries that I need to get to follow that lifestyle from the little tiny convenience store. Or if I was living in rural, I'm from a rural Alberta, my mom went to the grocery store, I think maybe once a week or maybe once every 2 weeks. And so it would not have been very feasible for us to try and follow some of these eating patterns because we didn't have access to that. Or if you're even in some of our like big cities within Canada, there's definitely food deserts, and whether or not you can drive to the grocery store or if you have to ride the bus or pay for a cab to take you there. So there's that access as well. So kind of your eating patterns that you're able to follow and what works best for you is going to be kind of dependent on the access as well. And then another big thing that shows my bias as a dietitian, because I spend all day talking about nutrition, is that idea that like not everyone has, like there's a lot of nutrition knowledge that not everyone has. So even knowing like what a protein is, what a carb is, what a fat is, that's like basic nutrition knowledge, but not everyone has that. Or cooking skills is included in that. So that's also nutrition knowledge. So your level of ability to work in the kitchen and know what you're doing there can really play into like what kind of eating pattern works best for you. Because I know I definitely tried following a vegan vegetarian lifestyle for a while, I think quite a few years ago, but I found it's like you've got to know what you're kind of doing. Like you've got to know how to like put specific foods together to be able to get yourself a complete protein. Like there's this whole other level of knowledge that you need for some of these different eating patterns to be able to live them in like a healthy manner. So that whole nutrition knowledge, like if you're starting at base level, stepping up into like some of the more complicated eating patterns is going to be really, really hard. And along that idea is time. Like obviously most of us probably have way more time than what we're used to right now. I'm making some fancy meals that I don't usually ever make. I am tired of my own cooking though, I must admit that. But a lot of like different eating patterns, like some of them will take a lot more time. So how much time you have, how many jobs are you working, how many sports are your kids involved in, or if you're talking about athletes, you know, if they're training like 2 or 3 times a day, how much time do they have to like make these really fancy detailed things if they're following a very like limited diet in the sense, like it can take a lot to like follow a really good keto diet. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of time to like do a really good job at eating a vegan diet. You can totally do it. You can be healthy and vegan and vegetarian and all these things. It's just those take more time. So what kind of time you have is going to really play into it. And then from another social side of it, what about your family? So if you've got a family of 5 people and you're going to start eating one way and then the rest of your family is going to eat another way, that can really play into it. How many like age differences do you have in your family? How many different like cultures do you maybe have in your family? All these different factors can really play into like your style of eating and impacting what works best for you. And along with that is like how much stress you have in your life, your work situation. There's lots of that kind of like social side of your factors that impact what's the best choice for you. And then some other interesting stuff that's some research is being done right now, particularly by this one group. It's called the Predict Study series. This is not published data, so they're still working on it. I think they're on the second part of their study right now, is they're really looking into like personal nutrition response. So like how your body breaks down and uses food. It's pretty interesting. So this is, I think from their first study, there was like 1,000 people that they brought into their study. And if you look at the different graphs, each one shows like, so glucose, that's how each person responded. And each person was fed like exactly the same meal, how the insulin responded. And obviously you can see like the median and the mean, so like the average. But if you look at all of the like so many different, like some people were all over the place, and that's like their glucose responds to exactly the same meal as the other people. So it's like this whole other idea that each one of us have this individual way that our body breaks down and uses food too. Pretty cool, right? They even include in their study quite a few twins, and they've noticed that like twins will have a totally different response to the same food as well. So even though they're genetically the same, like identical twins, they will still have a very different like response to the glucose and insulin. So if you respond one way to like a specific food and someone else responds another way, that's going to kind of change what works best for you, just to make nutrition even more complicated, right? So simple. So those are some of the like some big factors that are really going to help or kind of determine what's best for you or for your athletes. And so really what you need to think or ask yourself is like kind of what pattern like aligns with your values, like understand what like your needs are, and identify a pattern that suits you the best. And that just comes down to this idea that I'm really trying to like bring home, is that clearly there's like no diet that's absolutely the best, but this is the big but, and this is what we're going to spend the rest of the time talking about, are these common elements that kind of run across most of the diet patterns that are proven to be beneficial to health. So these are kind of some key things that you can find in like almost all of these diets, and as long as they're there, we can kind of follow and have a healthy way of eating, no matter if you're eating vegetarian or you're eating Mediterranean or you're eating keto. As long as we have these kind of core common elements, it's going to be beneficial for your health. So what are these key common elements that we can kind of see in a healthy diet? No matter what the diet or the eating pattern is, what are these key elements? So the first one is super important, I think, anyway. Has anyone ever, this is like, obviously I want you guys to respond right now, but like think to yourself, have you ever heard of a diet or an eating pattern where they tell you to eat the most processed food that you can possibly find? Like load up on all that like super refined stuff. Like that's, eat all the sugar you possibly can. This is a new diet. It's not typically the way that it is. It always focuses, like almost any one of these eating patterns and diets focuses on eating like good quality, so really whole and minimally produced foods as much as possible. And this like picture just kind of shows it really well, is that you can have super awesome, really nutritious, whole food, plant-based eating that like gives you all your vitamins and your minerals and just has a whole bunch of goodness in there. Or you can also still be eating plant-based, but be eating this like, super processed, full of like additives and sugar and not having all these nutrients. It's focusing. So again, like the importance, if you stick to like, I guess it's just to show that you can do each diet or eating pattern well and nutritious and super healthy, and you can also do it pretty bad at the same time as well and not get all that good nutrition. So here's a little bit of like cool research just to like really talk about that process side of it. The graph that's on the left-hand side kind of correlates with the research paper on the top. And that one is a really cool paper or some research that they did on like ultra-processed diet and a non-processed diet. And what they did match like the calories and the sugar, the fat and the fiber between the two, between the ultra-processed and the not processed. On the very bottom, you can kind of see over a 14-day period, the body weight changes. So the red are the individuals who ate like the non-processed, so just like stuff that hasn't been processed at all. And then the blue are the people who ate the ultra-processed diet. So again, remember that they like match the calories and the fat and the fiber and the macronutrients, but there is a definite difference in body weight. And then on the top one, they also looked into the fact that there's a trend to actually eat more when we eat ultra-processed versus non-processed foods. So it just leads to this. There's some research, just some correlation between ultra-processed and us actually eating more food or overeating more easily, which is pretty interesting. And so just to like kind of define a little bit before I throw all these words around, like whole foods, processed, ultra-processed. Processed just means those are kind of foods that they've added like salt and sugar and fats, like usually just like at least 2 to 3 ingredients. usually you can often eat those foods without a bunch of preparation. But once we get into ultra processed, that's the ones that they've added either like fat, sugar, or salts, but they've also added in those artificial colors and flavors and the preservatives and all that stuff to make it like shelf stable and to make sure that the texture stays the way they want it and to make it more enjoyable for you to eat. But the whole idea behind this processing from a nutrition standpoint is that as the processing increases, the nutrient density decreases. So we lose that nutritional value and we gain additives usually. And then of course, some of the other papers that I have on there, we just have to bring it home to us Canadians as just to show there was a bunch of research done across Canada. I think it was, unfortunately, it was like back in 2004. These papers were written after that, but is using both of them using data from like 2004, but just showing that a correlation between like eating more ultra processed foods and having a lower diet quality, or eating more ultra processed foods and having a connection with obesity, which is sad, but so much the reason why the core to like a good healthy diet, and something that you do see within all these different eating habits or diets, is that focus on like quality, making sure you eat food as whole as possible or minimally processed to keep the best nutrition in there for you. And then I'm a dietitian, so of course this makes you healthier, we got to talk about veggies because they are the backbone of so much good stuff. So obviously vegetables are full of like a ton of vitamins and minerals, but unfortunately in Canada and both US, we don't tend to eat enough. I think Canadians, last statistic I saw, most of us ate like 4 servings. If you want to talk about like servings, where it's recommended to eat at least 5 to 7. Because these delicious like veggies and fruit that can really decrease your blood pressure, your triglyceride levels, they're connected with like a better weight ratio. There's some cool research to show like the more veggies you eat, there's a connection with like happiness. They're just a super important part of a healthy diet. And obviously the more variety, the better, because each one of the different colors and all the different veggies and fruit give you different things. So just trying to eat a bunch every single day. That it doesn't matter what kind of diet or eating pattern you go into, there is generally always an emphasis on lots of fruit or lots of veggies, and then also some fruit. Super big thing because of everything that they do for us. So that would be core element number 2. First one would be like the like whole foods, minimally processed. And then the second one was like eat more veggies. Veggies are a core part and fruit of any good healthy diet, not depending on what style you're exactly doing. And the next part is healthy carbs, which sounds kind of cheesy because like what's a healthy carb? But the healthiest carbs, shocker, are going to be the ones that are like unprocessed or minimally processed. So unprocessed, minimally processed, like whole grains, vegetables, fruit, beans are carbs. Those are going to be those amazing little bundles that are going to deliver you like lots of vitamins and minerals and fiber and lots of phytonutrients. Because having carbohydrates in your diet is a very important part, especially when you're talking about athletes. For a lot of them, they need that continuous stream of glucose to keep them performing at the highest level that they can in their sport. And we're definitely going to talk a little bit more about, because carbohydrates are a confusing thing for a lot of people. If we're eating lots of like unprocessed, minimally processed things, a lot of like the grains that we talk about, the best forms are going to be these whole grains. And I get lots of questions about this with like the athletes that I deal with. So I thought we'd talk about it. Like what the difference is between like a refined grain, so white bread, multigrain bread, or white rice, that kind of style of thing. Usually it's just like the endosperm. So like the middle part of the grain, which is going to be like the starchiest part of the carbohydrate. So that's always in your refined stuff. And you still have some proteins and vitamins, of course. But if we eat the whole grain, Then we also get this like bran, which is this super fiber filled outer layer, which has like lots of B vitamins and minerals. And then we also get the germ, which is this little part in the inside, which again has a bunch of vitamins, both B's and your E and your phytochemicals, and also healthy fats. So that's by eating like these carbohydrates that are not overly processed and picking ones that are still in like their whole natural state, and one way to say it, then you get all this extra goodness. Whereas when we refine it or we process it, you see how we lose a bunch of that really good nutrition. And just because there's also some really interesting research that I found, particularly the paper that's in the left-hand bottom corner, this one did a comparison between, they called it a multi-component dietary goal. It was the American Heart Association diet. So they have some recommendations that they make for people, which is, you know, a multi-layer, like quite a bit of different changes that you have to make within the American Heart Association kind of diet outline. And they compared that just to someone who just simply like increased their fiber content in their diet, and they found really good results to show that just by changing to have more fiber in a person's diet, that made changes within someone's reductions in their metabolic syndrome, which is crazy. So it doesn't require all these big drastic changes that for people to make, because not all of us can. That's not realistic for everyone. Something as small as putting more fiber in their diet made changes within their overall health as a human being. So pretty cool. Fiber's a rock star. And if we eat more veggies, if we eat less refined foods, if we eat healthy carbohydrates, we're automatically going to get more fiber. But just to show you that what a key part that plays in having a healthy diet, because fiber, there's two different kinds. You get both different kinds from like different foods. So eating lots of different foods and variation is going to be the easiest way to get it. But what fiber does, if we just don't really digest it, it doesn't break down into those sugar molecules like other carbohydrates. But it actually passes through our body kind of undigested. If it's soluble, it kind of absorbs water. It slowly digests, can help with constipation. Insoluble, that stuff really doesn't break down. It just kind of stimulates your gastrointestinal tract. Yeah, so they both do very different things, but they're super important. And Canadians, I think the last stats I saw, most Canadians got on average around 17 grams of fiber every day. But the recommendations right now are a female should get 25 every day and a male should get 38. So we're way, way below. But this is definitely a key component, as you can see, to like living a healthy life. And you can fit this fiber, and it kind of, you will get fiber if you follow some of these core elements and any one of these different diets. And of course, except for the old school low fat diet, most diets do now include like some really good healthy fats, and which is awesome because we need those. They're super important if they're healthy fats. So that would be our things like vegetable oils, nuts, seeds, fish. Those are all really good healthy fats, and they're really anti-inflammatory. Whereas some of the other fats that we hear about sometimes, like the trans and the saturated, those ones are more inflammatory. So instead of inflammatory, they're more inflammatory. So there's lots of health risks with consuming too much of them. But healthy fats is a really key part of any kind of eating pattern, and can be fit into any of the diets or eating patterns that you see all around. You just need to make sure that we focus on getting those healthy ones. And then, of course, protein. The rock star of like almost every athlete's diet. They all love protein. Protein is always important. It's in, I can't think of a single diet or eating pattern that I've heard of that doesn't have protein in it. It's definitely always in there. Of course, most of them focus on lean protein, sorry. But the key thing is, like, again, just to think about the fact that we need protein. It's all the way through our body. It's in our muscles, it's in our bones, it's in our hair, it's in our skin. It's like almost in every single body part and tissue that we have. And it makes up a bunch of the enzymes that we need for like lots of the chemical reactions that we do. And it's kind of cool, but there's like 10,000 different proteins that kind of make up who you are and what you do and keep you the way you are as a human being. And as long as we get protein of some source in our diet, whether it's like different amino acids, so amino acids bind together to create a whole protein. So whether or not we get them in like different amino acid components from different nuts and seeds, or if we get them in whole from like eggs or meat, doesn't matter, just as long as we get those amino acids and those things all put together so that we get the protein that we need. And there's lots of interesting push in research, obviously, is to make a protein from more plant-based as much as possible. Not to say that you can't consume meat, but there is just lots of good stuff to show also that like the more lean proteins, so there's some more stuff that you can get from like nuts and seeds and legumes, those are going to be awesome. And your veggies have them too. And then slip some of the other meat-based stuff in if you need to, but protein is definitely a very important thing. And then another thing that's really been kind of key, I think, for a healthy diet, and the reason why is there's the research that shows this eating attentively. So eating slow, paying attention, eat until you're like 80% full. That whole idea is being aware. So often when we like don't pay attention to what we eat, either we like overconsume later in the day because we forgot, we don't even realize what we already ate. If you're an athlete and we're like trying to hit specific like macro like amounts in our overall day, because athletes train so much, if we're just like not paying attention and we're eating super fast, it can be really hard to keep track of like making sure that you're consuming what you need to. There's some of that stuff around like eating slowly allows you to like only eat till you're 80% full, because there is that transit time for food and communications between our stomach and our brain and the hormones and all that stuff that goes on. If we're eating super fast, we can definitely go past that point before we even realize it. If you ever want an example, I always think of Christmas or like some holiday like that, when the food is so delicious and there's people around and you're not paying attention. We all tend to overeat on those occasions. So eating slow, you're going to be able to pay attention. You're going to be aware of what you ate. And there's also that interesting idea of like, if we're thinking about what we're putting in our mouth, we're a lot more aware of the nutritional value of what we're eating, right? Like if we're just eating as fast as we can, we're not really thinking about like, this is nutritionally awesome, but if I like, this is super good for me, but I could, if I instead stop and think and pay attention, I will be more aware of, you know what, maybe this doesn't have quite everything that I need. I should add something else in there instead of just like eating it as fast as possible. Again, this is also like, I often tell athletes, like, if you're gonna enjoy those delicious chocolates, which is totally cool and fine, just like enjoy them and savor them and be aware and conscious of what you're eating. And that's mostly just so that you can actually savor the moment and enjoy it more than anything. But we also, when we pay attention, we tend to get satisfied sooner and feel satisfied afterwards. And so maybe then you'll end up eating like a quarter of the chocolate bar instead of the whole chocolate bar or something like that. Not that that's the main thing that I'm trying to say, but just a point. So just to bring it back again, this kind of comes back to the essence of like all of the, obviously like there were the elements that we talked about, like minimally processed, like whole as much as possible. Oh my goodness, now I'm drawing a blank. Like protein in there, good healthy fats, healthy carbohydrates. I'm forgetting one of my points. Fiber. Oh, of course, vegetables. How did I forget? As much veggies and fruit as possible, and eating slow. It all kind of comes down to like, again, these like 7 words of like eat food, not too much, and mostly plants. But that can kind of be worked into like almost any one of those diets that are out there, or eating patterns, kind of this core running through, or those elements, or those elements that we talked about. And just this idea, we want to eat food, real food, as much as possible, and then not too much, and try and get as many plants in there as we can. There's a definite idea rolling around to try and think about getting like 75% of your plate should be from plant sources, which is kind of interesting. But yeah, that is everything. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Melissa.
Yeah,
And I think there was a couple questions in the chat box. I don't know if you could see them from when you were presenting.
I'll bring them up now for sure.
Okay. I think it has to do with some of the articles you brought up.
Oh
I
yeah.
just didn't want to interrupt because you're on a roll. But someone asked about the macronutrients diet. You mentioned no great change after 6+ months. Does this apply to any general macronutrient diet, or is the result variable because of the tendency for people to change their lifestyle routine diet in the long term?
Yeah, so yeah, they did like 14 different diets in that paper one of the papers I brought up. And I'm trying to think if I remember reading whether or not it was because they said that it changed by the end of because there is statistically from lots of other stuff I read, this tendency to start changing back after, like, as we get further out to a year, because it's hard to stick with it. I don't remember it from that paper being described as that reason, but I'll definitely look back and let you know, or I can link up that paper for you for sure, just to make sure, because I don't want to lie to you.
Yeah, I'll be sending a follow-up email and we can just link it in there and we'll put it in the YouTube description as well.
Yeah.
And then there was kind of like a follow-up to that. Does this general rule apply to all sorts of ethnic foods, or is it the controlled variable, a Western diet? I guess that will kind of be answered in the article.
Yeah, and a lot of like this article was based off of that weight loss, and I think the big thing from the paper was just showing that by the end they all kind of came to like the same end, like no one macronutrient ratio by the end had more weight loss than the others, or better blood pressure results by the end. They all kind of balanced out by the end of like the 1 year period.
Okay, and there's quite a few questions coming in, so I'll just read them out loud just so we have it for video. So the next one was, it had to do with one of those research articles as well. So the processed versus unprocessed food, were the participants randomized population groups, or was it randomized athletes?
They were definitely like regular population, not
Okay.
athletes. Unfortunately, I wish I could find awesome athlete research like that. Is butter better than cheese? They're both on the saturated side of fat side. I'm not anti butter or cheese. It's just one of those things where we just have to, consume less versus more. And there's different cheeses too. Cheese is a tricky one. There's so many different kinds.
And the next question is, any tips on providing nutrition information or resources to athletes or parents?
Ooh, any tips? Any resources? My sports science, so that I know I had one of his infographics up. He makes a lot of easy to read infographics if you're looking for resources that are super easy just to present to people. And he always has a ton of information on there. Tips for providing, I don't know, this is always a struggle. This is my life struggle, is trying to find like the best ways to provide nutrition information and resources for athletes and parents. Definitely the more hands-on is, from my own experience, is the best way to do it. But I know that's pretty tricky. But my science sport, yeah, he does have some really good infographics that are easy to like look at for sure.
Awesome. And just for everyone too, who maybe this is your first time joining, we do have all of our videos posted on YouTube. So there are a few other nutrition presentations that you can always rewatch yourself, but also pass on to like your athletes and parents. And we have another one coming up that's going to be talking about like community athlete versus high performance athlete and how they should be fueling themselves. So like that's a really good one that you could pass on to your athletes and parents. So that's is that next week or the week after? Anyway, there's always a nutrition one in the horizon, so keep an eye out for it. Another question, so this is the cute one. My son Lucas, who's 11, has been listening the entire time, wants to know what's a healthy bedtime snack for a preteen.
Ooh. So usually we talk about healthy bedtime snacks. A key part is looking for a really good quality of protein. So depending on what kind of eating pattern you like. So if you do dairy, that's usually a really easy one. Or if not, some athletes will do eggs. If you do eggs, it's just like getting a really good quality. So something with like quite a bit of protein in there. I'm trying to figure out other ways to like define good protein. Usually like dairy, like maybe not a big stack of bacon is what I'm meaning for like good quality protein right before you go to bed. And then especially if you have a big practice the next morning, it depends on if Lucas is like getting up and going to do training, then we for sure talk about also having some nice whole grains. So some of that, like even if it's cereal, like a good whole grain cereal with some milk, if you do milk, that's a good bedtime snack too, because that good whole grain kind of carbohydrate will like burn in your stomach and you'll digest it, and then still could potentially fuel you the next day if you have an early training session. Because I know lots of athletes can't eat first thing in the morning. If they have an early morning training session, and so instead of trying to pack that food in, which a lot of them can, is like if they can't do that, then making sure that we get some really good healthy carbohydrates the night before to try and hold them over until the next day.
Awesome,
So, yeah,
thank you.
of course.
And another question I'll read out loud. Lots of athletes who have currently been doing less or lower intensity training due to quarantine have been talking about being less hungry and so eating less meals. Does the amount of meals matter to the athlete's nutrition, or is it the overall calories and nutrients count that matters?
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's a complicated question. um, it generally speaking, like the bigger thing that's going to come into play is how much their overall caloric and nutrient count. So trying to get what they need for the day at some point. We do often like talk about trying to still get like the morning snack and the afternoon snack, but it's more important that they get the overall what they need. And it's just that idea, like, especially with like protein, that you want to try and get protein in like smaller, like 20 for breakfast, 20 for lunch, 20 for supper, just to give an example. Your body's going to be able to get that, absorb more of it and utilize more of it if it's broken up into like more times of feeding than if we ate all 40 in one sitting, if that makes sense. But yeah, I know athletes are less hungry because they're not training as much. And so, it's a tricky one. But yeah, it's not as that you don't have to eat 5 meals a day. You don't have to eat like 7 meals a day. 7 would be a lot, but some athletes do it.
Awesome. And another one, how long should we wait to start training or doing physical activity after eating?
Ooh, so theoretically, like the golden time to have like a full-fledged meal and then go and exercise, we typically say like 3 to 4 hours. But also, this is part of like why every eating pattern and diet there's not one set one that works for everyone, is that I know some athletes that they eat 4 hours before they exercise and then they don't eat again before they go training. They're starving, because some of them are going to have like amazing metabolism and they just burn through that food super fast. So they need to eat again right before they go and train. That like hour before is kind of where hour to a half hour before, that's kind of as close as you want to cut it in theory. Anything closer than that, and the probability of you still having it in your stomach is going to be a lot higher. You want to have digested the food so you can start tapping into it and using it to do like whatever your training or physical activity is. But I definitely know male athletes who can eat a cheeseburger, which like breaks every one of my nutrition rules, and then go and like rules, but like what we say you should do. But they eat a cheeseburger and then they can jump out and do like a super hard running competition and like not even be phased. I would be super sick if I tried doing that, and most people would be. But again, we're also unique. And so that's where a big part of it comes into like really starting to listen to your own body and start playing around with like, this is what I tried one time. When I went and did my training session, I was like revved up. I felt awesome. This was so good. This is kind of idea of what I ate. This was the time. And then the next time you can try something different. And then maybe you went and did your training and you're like, man, I was lethargic. My legs were super heavy. I just didn't feel good. And then you can just like, there are some general rules, but a lot of it does come down to like, unfortunately, what works the best for you.
All right, great. Thank you, Melissa.
Yeah, of course.
And just a last call, is there any other questions for Melissa? Feel free to use your mic or use the chat box.
How would you identify what works best for your athlete? Ooh. Lola, good question. So that would be, unfortunately, that takes time, unfortunately, or fortunately, time and relationship building. So that's working alongside, well, first of all, you can walk through some of these like different factors. If you were thinking about like what kind of eating pattern or diet works best for them, like walk through some of those factors that could change it for them. Like, what do you like to eat? What don't you like to eat? And then it's a lot of, if you can get them to document anything, which is always tricky, working alongside them and like walking through, or getting like, did this work for you? Did this not? Getting them to like start like a food diary even, or like food exercise diary per se, a journal, to keep track of like how you felt, how they felt. And it's just going to take time to like start working through what works the best for them. And they have to be, it takes some awareness for sure on the athlete's part to know this felt good, this didn't feel good, or like helping them realize that even though they've ran this race with no food in their stomach and they do really well and they have done it for like the last 7 years, that doesn't mean that if they actually start fueling like before race that they can't feel that much better. But for them, their level of knowing of like what is good is, does that make sense? Like, what did one coach described it to me? What was it? It was like, it was the idea of like, we don't know how good something can be until we try it. So like, I always think of someone who eats cheeseburgers and McDonald's, no offense to McDonald's, every single day and lives life and thinks that they feel okay and are happy. But once you start feeding them like a better, more well-balanced diet, they might not like it in the start, but they will start to actually feel better. And then their idea of what feeling good as a human would have changed compared. I know that was a really botched description, but
No, it makes sense. I understand.
it's like, oh, this is like a rabbit hole.
I got a private message. So another question: what meal or snack is best for post-game recovery in maybe in a sport that's like a longer period of time? So like a soccer or hockey, or like I guess a interval. What's that called? Like a sport that would
like
be shifts.
Oh,
Not,
yeah, like, oh my goodness, no,
like a 90-minute soccer game, but you're not full out the whole time, I guess.
Yeah, you're not. So some of that answer is going to be, some of it has to do with like how soon you're going to be training again or having another race. So if it's a competition setting where you've got another game coming up, getting like within, a couple hours, then you're really going to want to make sure you get like at least 20 grams of protein and some carbohydrates. And I know this sounds like I work for Dairy Canada, but I don't. But there is some like, there is a reason why like chocolate milk gets a lot of rap, like good publicity for recovery, because it doesn't have that protein and it does have that carbohydrate ratio, like kind of the right, like it has protein and it has the right ratio of carbohydrates, plus something about like having the carbs and the protein in with the dairy actually helps you ingest more of the hydration. Like there's some research to show that it helps you hydrate better too. I think a lot of that could happen with like like if you did soy chocolate milk, the same thing. Like you still got carbs and you got good protein and you got that hydration. So that can be a really good thing to like help you fuel afterwards. Or a smoothie can be a rock star. Like getting that 20 grams of protein, getting at least like 2 to 3 times as much carbohydrates afterwards. But if you got like a day or something to recover, at least after your hard workout, that recovery isn't as like huge. If you can like do your exercise, maybe grab like a banana with some like peanut butter or like a little bit of carbs and protein, and then go home and have your supper and start like refueling that way. It's not as important. Recovery gets really crucial when we've got like these back to back, which a lot of athletes do. They're usually training like not very many athletes have like a full day of recovery in between every session that they work out. Yeah. Some of them have like a couple hours every single time. So yeah, making sure you get that 20 grams of protein at least, and at least double the amount of carbohydrates. Smoothies are huge. If athletes do yogurt with granola, like Greek yogurt and granola is a big thing. Yeah.
Great. All right. Any more questions for Melissa? All right. Well, thank you so much, Melissa. And thank you everyone for joining us tonight. As mentioned, this was recorded and it will be on YouTube. So if you do want to rewatch and just go back and look at more of the information, definitely do that. And we will be following up with an email that will contain some of those articles that Melissa brought up. And my contact will be there as well. So if you need to reach out with any questions or comments, please feel free to do so. Our next session is tomorrow evening at 7 p.m. So we're actually going to be having Zoe come on. She's a local swim coach in Nova Scotia. So she's been doing a lot of creative activities with her athletes to keep them engaged during this time, and has been really active on Instagram, so targeting her audience and her athletes. So we definitely encourage you guys to come out and check out what she's been doing and maybe take some ideas from her as well. And then on Thursday, we have a mental performance consultant coming on to talk about kind of like the basics, so visualization 101. So a really popular topic that coaches have been requesting. So definitely check that out at 3 p.m. on Thursday. And then again, tomorrow's session is at 7 p.m. with Zoe. So I'll be including all this in the follow-up, but thank you so much for joining, and we hope to see you tomorrow night. Thanks, Melissa.
All right. Thank you, everyone.